Good morning and welcome. My name is Coral Owen. I'm the Professional Development Coordinator for the Military Families Learning Network, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar on phytonutrients and cardiovascular disease. This learning opportunity is hosted by the Nutrition and Wellness Concentration Area of the MFLN. Webinar resources, including presentation slides, can be found at the learn.extension.org link that you see in the chat pod, as well as the important info pod in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Additionally, if you have need of tech support during today's webinar, please email us at milfamln@gmail.com. This address is located along with the link I just mentioned in the important info pod at the lower right-hand corner of this page. The Military Families Learning Network is part of a DoD-USDA partnership for military families, connecting military family service providers and cooperative extension professionals to research and to each other through engaging online learning opportunities. You can explore more about our communities and resources at militaryfamilies.eextension.org. I'd also like to let you know that you can join our MFLN webinar email list to receive our monthly update by clicking on the link in the lower right-hand corner of this slide. Additionally, the MFLN is active on Facebook and Twitter, and we host an archive of our professional development sessions on YouTube. At this time, I'd like to turn things over to Robin Allen, who's our moderator today, who is also the social media specialist for the Nutrition and Wellness Concentration Area. Robin has been a registered dietitian for over 30 years, and she is also a retired captain in the Navy, where she started her dietitian's career. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you, Coral. Today I'm very excited to introduce our speaker, Dr. Elvira De Mejia. Dr. De Mejia is a professor and assistant dean for research and university scholar at the University of Illinois. She has published over 190 peer-reviewed scientific publications and 25 chapters in books in the areas of food science and nutrition. The long-range goal of her research program is to enhance the health of individuals by the identification and evaluation of the benefits of bioactive compounds in plant foods. She is currently working on bioactive phytochemicals, mainly proteins, peptides, and flavonoids from legumes, cereals, herbs, and fruits, and their effect on the prevention of chronic disease. Before I turn things over to our speaker, I'm going to ask the audience to complete a very quick poll for us. You'll notice a gray box pop up on your screen. If you could please click on your affiliation, keeping in mind that you might need to scroll down the screen for a bit. I'll give you a few minutes to finish this poll. We've got a nice active VA crowd. Okay, thank you very much. I will now turn things over to our speaker, Dr. De Mejia, to begin the presentation.
Good morning and welcome to this webinar. I thank you, the coordinators, for the opportunity to share this information on phytonutrients and cardiovascular disease. So to get started, let's see our learning objectives. One of them will be to know what do we really know about the role of bioactive compounds in plant foods related to cardiovascular disease. We will talk about the potential of fruits and vegetable flavonoids on heart health implications and what is their capacity to protect against some chronic diseases. Finally, we will identify the sources of bioactive compounds in the diet and educate our patients, clients, customers in selecting foods to reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. But before we start, let's see the overview. We will briefly talk about inflammation and the relationship with cardiovascular disease. What are the risk factors for heart disease? What are some bioactive compounds related to cardiovascular disease? And by the way, when I talk about bioactive compounds, I'm talking about these phytonutrients, phytochemicals in plant foods that have some biological activity beyond nutrition. So specifically, we will talk about phenolic compounds and their biological activities. How do they get absorbed in the body and metabolized? We'll specifically talk about anthocyanins and risk of cardiovascular disease, examples of phytoesterols and risk of cardiovascular disease, and finally, proteins and peptides. We'll give you some examples. Finally, of course, we will have a take-home message, and I hope you enjoy it and ask questions. Okay, so let's get started with some understanding by the consumers. This pie relates to a customer survey done by IFIC, Functional Foods for Health Consumer Trending Survey. And it's very interesting to see that 87% of Americans believe that certain foods have health benefits. So as you can see here, 50% strongly agree and 37% somewhat agree. So that's good. We know they do believe that foods can bring health benefits. And in the next one, even more amazing, when they surveyed these 1,000 customers, people, they were aware of food components related to health benefits. And specifically in this slide, you can see the relation of food components and heart health. For instance, the consumer says that between 85% and 43% of Americans are aware of specific food components and their association with heart health benefits. For instance, omega-3 fatty acids, monosaturated fats, folate or folic acid, soy protein, soy in general, plant esterols, fiber, whole grains, you can read there, potassium. So it's great to know that the consumer is aware of these pair health food component relationships. So the prevalence of cardiovascular disease is rising, as we know, and it is the prime cause of death in all developed countries. Diet has a significant impact on the development of heart disease, and we know now that inflammation is directly involved in initiation and progression of atherosclerotic lesions. However, several bioactive compounds from plant foods inhibit inflammation and also oxidative stress, which is good because these are risk factors related to cardiovascular disease. So what are the risk factors for heart disease? Some are modifiable factors and some cannot be changed. For instance, in this slide, we can see in the bottom, family history, genetics, ethnicity, that cannot be changed. But all the other factors listed here are modifiable factors. And you know what? The diet related can be modified by behavioral changes. For instance, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, unhealthy diet, obesity. So all these can be modified by the diet, which is very good news. Here we can see to your left of the slide a clean, nice, normal human artery with no atherosclerosis, clean, smooth muscle endothelium. But to your right, you can see an artery narrowed by atherosclerotic plaque. So this atherosclerosis is initiated by risk factors, obesity, diabetes, hypertension. There is an inflamed region at the arterial wall, and that accumulates cells called macrophages. These cells engulf lipid particles and develop into an atherosclerotic lesion. These lesions are mainly formed by foam cells, and this inflammation is a contributor in the pathogenic process. So what do we need to know? So we need to know how to avoid this atherosclerotic lesion. And there is scientific evidence that postulates that diet-defined risk factors participate in the initiation inflammatory cascades and in atherosclerosis. So what diets reduce this process? For instance, The Mediterranean diet has been associated to decreased heart disease risk, decreased blood pressure, decreased low-density lipoprotein cholesterol, and overall decreased mortality. So that sounds very interesting. What are the main key components of the Mediterranean diet? So here we can see that the Mediterranean diet emphasizes eating primary plant-based foods such as fruits and vegetables, whole grains, legumes and nuts, replacing butter with healthy fats such as olive oil and canola oil, very smart use of herbs and spices instead of salt to get these beautiful, delicious flavors in our food. It's important to limit red meat to no more than a few times a month. We need to eat fish and poultry several times a week. And also the social part, you know, the Latin Mediterranean style is sharing meals with family and friends and have some red wine in moderation, but it also brings very important bioactive compounds. Exercise is another important component, and I know you had a webinar emphasizing the importance of exercise, so this is also such an important part of the Mediterranean diet. So there is another very important diet as well, the DASH diet, dietary approaches to stop hypertension. This is a very important diet that has shown decrease of blood pressure, decrease also of low-density lipoprotein cholesterol, decrease triglycerides, increase high-density lipoprotein, and it has shown to be safe. So this is also a plant-based diet, low in sodium, low in fats, high in potassium, calcium, magnesium, high in fiber and protein, and this diet limits fat to less than 30% of daily calories per day, mainly monosaturated. And this is a list to your left of your screen, what this DASH diet includes. So we have whole grains, vegetables, and here are the recommendations of serving per day: fruits, low fat or fat-free milk, lean meat, poultry, fish, nuts, seeds, beans, you know, healthy fat and oils. What to restrict? Well, sweets, of course, low fat or fat-free. Sodium, there is a restriction, not more of 2,300 milligrams a day. If you drink alcohol, for women, maybe 1 drink or less per day. To reduce your blood pressure even more, you can replace some DASH diet carbohydrates with low-fat protein and unsaturated fat. So, as I said before, this is a diet that increases potassium, calcium, decreases sodium and fat, and is basically a plant-based diet. Do you have any questions so far? So there is a question regarding which is higher in bioactive compounds, the DASH diet or the Mediterranean diet? Well, both are plant-based diets. I would say the Mediterranean diet, it has a little bit more diversity in different foods. Maybe I'm thinking about wine and I'm thinking about other bioactive compounds present. However, the DASH diet is also a plant-based diet, which is outstanding and excellent as well. What other question do you have? Of course, soluble fiber. Yes, we will talk more about soluble fiber later on. And yes, beta-glucans are so important. So what is the difference between the DASH diet compared to the Mediterranean diet? I think, as I said, the Mediterranean diet includes a little bit more diverse foods, different foods, and includes wine under the restrictions that we mentioned before. Let's see, what other question do you have? Oh, well, are bioactives the most important part of the 2 eating patterns? Not really, no, because remember, these diets are low in fat, no saturated fat is considered, it has low sodium, and also the type of oil used. So it's a high protein, we have good quality protein, and besides the bioactive compounds, we have all of these other important components that we mentioned before. Okay, let's continue. So here we mention some bioactive phytochemicals in foods. For instance, there is this seed called chia, Salvia hispanica, that contains omega-3 fatty acids. We have peppers that contain carotenoids, but also some phenolics such as capsaicin that gives the pungent taste to some peppers. Jamaica, which is hibiscus, we will talk more about it, and it contains anthocyanins and other phenolic compounds that are also very important contributors to health benefits. And lignans, we will talk about phytoesterols. We have polyphenols in beans. Black beans have been highlighted as very important legumes in our diet, not just because of the polyphenols, but also the proteins that contain a special type of peptides that are in those proteins. Amaranth also contains proteins, and peptides have shown to have some effect decreasing markers of inflammation. And here we see berries, we see herbal teas as well. Hibiscus again, Mexican oregano has a very unique makeup of some phenolic compounds that prevent some chronic diseases and inflammation. Parsley, soy, our golden seed, you know, it contains I'm surprised of the many components that we contain in this beautiful seed. Not just proteins, very high concentration of proteins, but some isoflavones, saponins, and lunacin, which is a naturally present peptide that also contributes to some problems related to inflammation and cardiovascular disease. Processing is good sometimes. For instance, here in this slide, we put germination, and germination sometimes is good because liberates some of the bioactive compounds and make them more bioavailable. So, what is the role of some compounds from the diet? For instance, we have antioxidants in our diet, inhibitors of oxidative stress. These inhibit vascular reactivity and prevent cardiovascular disease. Some other bioactive compounds are antihypertensive, hypotriglyceremic, and hypocholesterolemic. We will talk in more details about those. Increased intake of phenolics in the diet is very good. Dietary flavonoids affect both acute and chronic inflammation through their antioxidant effect. So decreased cardiovascular disease risk factors, increased antioxidant capacity, having the capability of reducing oxidative stress, and evidence shows also the contribution to anti-inflammation postprandial acute chronic problems. So all of these can be associated to health benefits and decreased incidence of disease. So we need to increase the intake of phenolics to decrease the incidence of disease. So some phenolics also can counterbalance negative effects of pro-inflammatory meals. Here we see celery with apigenin, which is a flavone. That's the general name of the phenolic compound. Don't worry about that. You just know that that celery contains this very powerful small phenolic compound. Onion and apple, for instance, contain flavonols. Quercetin is one example. Tea contains catechins, flavanols, and soybean contains genistein, isoflavones. So you can see here some of the phenolics, and all or several of them are linked to anti-inflammatory pathways that decrease interleukins and we can see some of them here. Chemical diversity of polyphenols. There is a huge diversity of polyphenols in our everyday diet. For instance, in apples, we have simple phenolic compounds, catechol. In grapes, we have stilbenes, which are like resveratrol, for instance. In berries, all kinds of berries, we have polyphenols, anthocyanins, flavonols. In herbs, in different herbs, that is so beautiful to substitute salt for different types of herbs. And tea, we talk about the flavonols and isoflavones in soy. What is the absorption of these flavonoids and what is their metabolism? So it's important to know that food contains different phenolics, and in this case I put an orange juice just to show that contains 15 milligrams of naringenin, a phenolic compound with biological activity. It gets easily absorbed in the small and large intestine. However, in 30 minutes, about 30 minutes, in plasma we find very, very low percentage, like 0.2% of the original polyphenol. And when we analyze urine, we don't find the original chemical nature of the polyphenol. So it tells us that it has been metabolized by colonic microflora or maybe beta-glucosidases. Metabolism usually takes place through methylation, sulfation, glucuronidation, different types of transformations, and then it gets absorbed in the tissue or excreted in urine, bile, or feces. It's rapidly metabolized, and this allows for easy transport around the body. So whatever happens to the original compound gets metabolized, gets transformed, and exerts the biological activity. In the next slide, we have also examples of absorption and metabolism. In this case of anthocyanins, you know, these compounds that give the color to our food, these are very soluble phenolic compounds. The estimated daily intake of anthocyanins is about 200 milligrams. We should increase it. Sometimes it's as low as 12 milligrams per day. The absorption is mainly in the small intestine as well. It's very efficient epithelial tissue uptake. And here also we know that gut microbiota cleaves the glucoside linkage and liberates the compound, which then gets again metabolized, and only 1% is recovered in urine. We believe the metabolized and degradation products may play a key role in their biological activity. There are several studies on roselle, jamaica, tisane, different names for this hibiscus, sabdariffa, that support the evidence demonstrates in vitro, preclinical, and even clinical models that it regulates consumption. Its regular consumption may help to control and prevent certain disease without health risks. Hibiscus has antioxidant properties, and we know that the extracts of these beautiful chalices lower cholesterol and hypertension. Here are two names of two phenolic compounds present besides the antioxidants we mentioned before. These are chlorogenic acid and protocatechoic acid. There is one study I want to talk with you, and the reference is there if you want to go and see the details of this interesting study. They used 1.25 grams of dry leaves in 240 milliliters, 1 cup of boiling water for 6 minutes. And they gave it to a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial to 65 pre- and mildly hypertensive adults between 30 and 70 years of age, not taking blood pressure medication, and they took 3 cups per day of this brew hibiscus tea for 6 weeks, and they compared it with a placebo. measure the blood pressure at baseline and weekly intervals. And to the right, you can see the results. At 6 weeks, we see hibiscus tea lowers systolic blood pressure compared with placebo. It lowers 7.2 versus 1.3. Participants with higher systolic blood pressure at baseline show a greater response to hibiscus treatment. So in summary of this study, the authors conclude that the dietary change assessed, regularly incorporating 3 servings per day of hibiscus tea into the diet, effectively reduced blood pressure in pre- and mildly hypertensive adults. And this has been repeated in other studies. So this is very tasty tea that you can use with no risk of safety issues. There has been an association in some countries with high levels of magnesium and aluminum, but depending on the region where the tea is grown. We have also anthocyanins in foods as modulators of inflammatory pathways to prevent developing of some chronic disease. These colorful, health-promoting properties because they have antioxidant capacity and they have anti-inflammatory. These are water-soluble pigments that give the color to our food supply. These are perfectly safe to take them during pregnancy and lactation. That's not a problem. Yeah, some of these may not be available in all communities, but in general, they are available in some communities. So berries are a rich source of phytochemicals. Water-soluble pigments, we can see here, best recognized for high content of flavonoids, and we also have some condensed tannins of proanthocyanidins, and there is scientific evidence showing antioxidant activity, anti-inflammatory effects, cardiovascular protection, and these are in vitro and in animal studies. There is still the need for more human control, placebo-controlled studies to verify all of these properties of berries. We did a study here in my laboratory where we produced the alkalized wine, fermented, produced from different berries, blackberries and blueberries. And it was very interesting. We did the in vitro and also animal study that the alkalized wine had an anti-inflammatory properties, increase antioxidant capacity, inhibit oxidation, and reduce oxidative stress. At the end, we saw a reduced metabolic syndrome complications reduction, and this was a very interesting, it's a very interesting option, you know, if you cannot drink alcohol or want to limit the alcohol consumption, you can also get the alkalized red wine and reduce blood pressure. Phenolic compounds in fruits and vegetables, we mentioned some of them. Mexican oregano in particular contains very high concentrations of luteolin and apigenin. Also parsley contains apigenin. These are small phenolic compounds that mitigate oxidative stress and activation of pro-inflammatory signals. Therefore, if we do this, we decrease potential risk of cardiovascular disease. In this slide, because we cannot talk about everything in detail and there are so many publications in the literature, this is a summary of what we know, really know about results for phenolic compounds and cardiovascular disease. And let me tell you, we still need studies to develop better quality, long-term, crossover design, double-blind, placebo-controlled randomized clinical trials, or do a more vigorous meta-analysis to conclude in humans on the benefits of these phenolic compounds. But let me highlight some that we do have evidence. These are the flavonols present in dark chocolate. efficacy of cocoa flavanols in blood pressure and heart function improvement. Studies need a little bit more flavanol-free controls, but the potential is very, very high. Another studies or group of studies highlight flavonols like quercetin is effective at reducing blood pressure in hypertensive men, and of course further analysis in greater cohorts are needed. And the other that I want to highlight are the isoflavones. We need greater population sizes, but there has been significant improvement in women with low baseline flow-mediated dilation levels. So the role of bioactive compounds as adjuvant in cardiovascular disease is increasing, and validation of their effects is really essential. So we know that these play an important role, and we have an idea of how much per day would be beneficial, but we need to continue obtaining more in vivo in human studies to look at these results. So what foods have quercetin was one question before. Apple and onions, I would say, are those very important ones. Yeah, some patients may be sensitive to histamine, probably, and then they have to be careful with dark chocolate. Thank you for that comment. So let's continue here. Now we will start a series of examples, couple of examples, and I want to highlight the phytoesterols, a well-known example of a bioactive compound. This is a plant origin compound, very similar in structure, chemical structure to cholesterol. The consumption in the diet is around 400 milligrams per day, is minimally absorbed. Typical, the levels in plasma is about 0.5 milligrams per deciliter, but the intake of 1 to 3 grams per day can reduce total cholesterol about 10%, and low density cholesterol, lipoprotein cholesterol, in 15%. So we know the efficacy of polyesterols in enriched foods has been confirmed by a meta-analysis of 84 controlled clinical studies. So as you know, as we know, blood cholesterol, the increase of blood cholesterol increases mortality due to coronary heart disease. And we know that 1% decrease in blood cholesterol may reduce 3% in the risk of coronary heart disease. So it's important to reduce blood cholesterol. Here we have a study, one study, very important study, showing the efficacy of phytoesterols fortified foods that has been confirmed in recent meta-analysis, where we see a cholesterol response of decrease after 27 weeks with a dose of 30 grams per day of phytoesterols. So how does it happen? How does cholesterol work in the body? These phytoesterols work in the body. Well, phytoesterols are believed to interfere with cholesterol incorporation into micelles, cholesterol absorption into the cells of the small intestine. Also, there is an interference with that absorption, and phytoesterol consumption results in decreased cholesterol absorption, leading to decrease of serum cholesterol. Safety, well, phytoesterols are minimally absorbed, and phytoesterols are considered safe by several agencies throughout the world. So no evidence of an association between elevated levels of blood phytoesterols and an increase of cholesterol risk. There is a claim accepted by the FDA in 2000 that it says that food containing at least 0.65 grams per serving of vegetable oil esterols eaten twice a day with meals for a daily intake of at least 1.3 grams as part of the diet, low in saturated fat and cholesterol, may reduce the risk of heart disease. So this claim has been approved. Yes, phytoesterols are in the membrane of plants. And in 2016, FDA broadened and approved the food categories for the addition of phytoestrogens. So now we see them present in dressing for salads, even in juices, in baked goods. We see them in yogurt, in processed soups, in salty snacks. So the categories have been expanded to increase these phytoestrogens present in processed foods. We'll move on to soy protein that, as we know, there is a claim since 1999 approved by the FDA that soy protein may reduce the risk of heart disease. And we are talking about 25 grams of soy protein per day as part of a diet low in saturated fat and cholesterol, and it may reduce the risk of heart disease. New studies specifically implicate chronic inflammation as a major contributor to the progression of atherosclerosis, and some derivatives of soy protein are able to decrease chronic inflammation. We need to learn more about the mechanism of action, but we believe it's through the production of some smaller parts of the protein called peptides that have different physiological functions, among them anti-inflammatory functions, hypocholesterolemic. These are small subunits of amino acids together that came from the soy protein and show antioxidant capacity and some immunomodulatory effects. These peptides can be obtained from basically any food that contains proteins. We see here from cereals, legumes. We have some examples here of amaranth and some other legumes that are present in our food supply. We did one study with soy milk where we had a male population aged 18 to 45 years of age. The BMI was between 25 and less than 300 pounds. They were non-smokers, and we had three groups. In one group, we had a special type of soy milk that we call it low glycine, low in some type of protein, and they had 12 grams of protein per day. We had the conventional soy milk, again 12 grams of protein per day, and bovine milk, that was our control, 12 grams of protein per day. It was very interesting to see that after 3 months of drinking 2 glasses of milk per day, oxidized LDL was decreased in the groups with soy milk. Serum oxidized LDL after 3 months was decreased mainly in the soy milk that contained low glycine in some type of protein present. We also noticed an increase in adiponectin, highly increase in the special low glycine in soy milk protein. And adiponectin increased after 3 months of the consumption of the milk. Another interesting marker that we observe in plasma, interleukin-6 decreased after 3 months for both types of soy milks. So this was very interesting. And finally, we noticed that soy milk increased serum antioxidant capacity after 3 months of consumption, which did not happen in the bovine milk. So we could say that low glycine in soy milk may be a useful product to include in meals designed to reduce oxidative stress and improve health in overweight individuals. So in summary here, we can say that diet has a very significant impact on hypertension, obesity, and diabetes, which are major factors for the development of cardiovascular disease. But we have to remember that initiation of and progression of atherosclerosis is influenced by inflammation. And we know that certain proteins and peptides can regulate atherosclerotic lesions. So now I have a question for you. We talk about the plaque that is made up of fat, cholesterol, calcium, and maybe other substances found in blood. And over time, This hardens and narrows the arteries. This limits flow of oxygen and blood and oxygen-rich blood to your organs and other parts of your body. So the question to you is, the buildup of plaque over time causes what? Which leads to serious problems, including heart attack, stroke, or even death. So that's the first question. And the second is, what is the main treatment for atherosclerosis? So the first answer, the build-up of plaque over time causes, what causes? Very good, Mallory. Excellent, Mallory. Good answer, Wendy. Very good. So we see some answers here. Yes, the build-up of plaque over time causes atherosclerosis. What is the main treatment for atherosclerosis? Can you give us some answers here, please? Angioplasty, okay. Surgery. Lifestyle change, yes. Mediterranean diet, DASH diet, yes, Jill. Plant-based diet, Marcia, Colleen, yes. Yes, low-fat diet, etc. So thank you so much for your answers here, yes. So as we know, atherosclerosis is a progressive chronic inflammatory disease, and oxidized LDL is implicated as a major risk factor. So we will stop here to look at your questions and answer some of your questions. Thank you, Mel. Yes, good diet and exercise. Healthy fats, important. Yes, Jill, thank you.
So Dr. De Mejia, we have some questions that occurred while you were talking that I'd like to get your answers to, such as Jessica wanted to know if there are any contraindications for hibiscus leaves, any food-drug interactions, or any problems with kidney disease or dialysis.
So in the case of hibiscus, as I mentioned, in some places around the world has been associated with high levels of aluminum and magnesium, but that's not the case in, at least in the plants that I have analyzed in the US. So no published literature, scientific literature relating hibiscus with problems. It's safe, and except for this magnesium and aluminum that may be of concern because they are high levels, mainly in Asia, in some regions in Asia. I haven't found any adverse effects due to the consumption of hibiscus tea.
Great, thank you. And then Marcia wanted to know if the effects of anthocyanins are reduced if the food is cooked.
Oh, that's a very good question. These are water-soluble compounds, so stable but soluble. So if you don't use the water where you are extracting the anthocyanins, then you may lose them. Let's say you are cooking colored corn and you don't drink the water or you discard the water. That's where you have most of your anthocyanins extracted. So yes, you need to also intake, like in beans, when you cook beans, if you soak the beans overnight, you are extracting a very high concentration of the anthocyanins. And if you just discard that water, then you are decreasing the intake of anthocyanins.
Great.
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, very good. If hibiscus can lower blood pressure, should we probably caution patients who are on blood pressure medication?
Yes, the studies I have seen are for patients on no blood pressure medication. However, I remember one study, and I can send you the link to that study, that they did it on patients on medication, under medical supervision. And even for them, they never went lower for their blood pressure. So the physician was able to start carefully removing the medication and increasing the hibiscus tea intake. So this has to be done with medical supervision, and it has been done in several countries where they can remove some of the high blood pressure medication and carefully increase the intake of hibiscus tea.
Interesting. Fermented berry wine versus unfermented berry juice. Are the health benefits the same?
Fermentation helps to liberate, to make more bioavailable some of these bioactive compounds in berries. So I would say fermentation is better just because it liberates and makes them more bioavailable. But if you don't drink wine or the alcoholized wine, the alternative is juice. Yes.
And is there any association between phytosterols and sex hormones?
I prefer not to go that route. I'm not a physician, so I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. Okay. So as follow-up, so the recommendation to drain and rinse canned vegetables and beans may be counteractive?
It depends, because some canned vegetables contain very high salt content, and it's better to get rid of the salt, you know. So if these are canned and they are in high liquid, a high salt liquid, is better to get rid of the drain them. Yeah, it's better to drain them. But for beans, if you cook them at home, it's better to include the liquid. I mean, some people soak the beans because it will be faster to cook them. But if you do that, include the water where you soak the beans as part of the meal, you know. So do not get rid of the liquid where you have some bioactive compounds.
So one recipe I saw called for amaranth leaves, not grain. Do the leaves have the same components as the grain?
Oh, that's a very good question. You know, in amaranth, we use the seeds and, of course, extract the oil. The oil has highly unsaturated, very aromatic oil with very high linoleic acid of the omega series fatty acids. So the oil extracted from the seeds is excellent source of omega fatty acids. Then the seed itself contains a very high concentration of protein. This is what we call pseudo cereal. It contains about 17% of proteins. Lipids about 9%. It's an excellent source of minerals, calcium, potassium. But also the leaves, amaranth leaves, are eaten by many consumers. So leaves mainly contain saponins and alkaloids, some proteins and glycosides, but the chemical composition of the leaves are very, very different from the seeds. So as I said, it's mainly saponins and alkaloids. People like the leaves, and it's okay to eat them, but the protein content is lower. And some of these leaves contain also color compounds called beta-cyanins, which are also some pigments different than anthocyanins, but also important antioxidants. And we have seen some of these compounds decreasing free radical, improving free radical scavenging activity, meaning decreasing oxidative stress. So yeah, that's a very important question, because these different parts of the same plant have different chemical composition. I was mainly referring to the seed, to the amaranth seeds.
Thank you. And then do you foresee any labeling questions or labeling regulations relative to bioactives?
Yeah, yes, of course, we have to go through regulations, and as we saw with the phytoesterols or the soy protein and some others from oat and barley, beta-glucans and things like that. Yeah, of course, it's important to have enough scientific evidence, clinical studies that back up the science, and then go to the regulatory bodies for verification and approval of regulatory claims. Absolutely.
Great. And then what do you recommend regarding black cumin seeds?
I don't have a lot of experience, but I have seen some papers claiming also some anti-inflammatory properties and antioxidant properties of black cumin seeds.
Wonderful. Well, I think that's enough questions for now. I think we'll still have some time at the end to answer questions if you want to continue on.
Okay. Well, what is our take-home message? I guess you can see the garlic there. You see the apples, broccoli, peppers, all these plant-based diet. And we have our 2015-2020 dietary guidelines. Follow a healthy eating pattern at appropriate calorie level. A variety of vegetables, dark greens, reds, orange, legumes are very important, starchy and others. Fruit, especially whole fruits. We have to work more on whole fruits, grains, fat-free or low-fat dairy. And I saw a question, I guess, regarding dairy, if it has an inflammatory effect. And the answer is yes. Proteins in milk, when we digest them, produce this smaller sequence of amino acids called peptides with anti-inflammatory potential. And there are many studies in the literature relating to the anti-inflammatory potential of dairy products. Protein foods, including seafood, lean meats, of course, restricted them to few per month, and nuts. We have an issue with nuts due to the high fat content, but few will be advisable to have. Soy products are very good as well. Limit saturated fat and trans fats, limit added sugar, and as we know, limit sodium. And as a comment, just I was in Mexico City, and the mayor of the city declared that all restaurants will eliminate the salt from the table. So if the customer requires salt, they can bring it to the table, but they have been avoiding in many restaurants putting salt on the table. So the customer doesn't automatically just add more salt to the food. So the American Heart Association dietary recommendation, of course, eat a variety of nutritious foods, variety of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, very similar, low-fat dairy products, nuts and legumes, avoid some tropical vegetable oils, and avoid saturated fats, beverage and foods with added sugar, high sodium foods and salt, and alcohol with moderation. And I would say wine could be, if you decide to drink alcohol, maybe wine would be a good part of these recommendations. So I guess we have more questions here, if you have some comments. Research on turmeric and heart disease. Yes, there are several studies, but right now we have to focus more on human studies. We have to be consistent on our experimental designs. We don't need that many human studies, but we need homogeneity. We need consistency on the results, and to get that, we need to test the same kind of extracts, the same population or similar kind of population to have an homogeneous strategy, research strategy, and then come up with results that are approved by the regulatory bodies. Is it better to use fermented dairy? Yes, just because sometimes when you ferment, you have the the live microorganism there that also comes to the play, fermenting some bioactive compounds and improving their bioavailability. Some anthocyanins and proanthocyanidins get fermented by some of the microbiome or microbiota we have in our body. And fermented foods, fermented dairy is excellent to increase the good microbes in our bodies. Oh, white tea, that's a great question. What are the health benefits of white tea? White tea comes from young leaves, not fermented tea leaves. It's a delicious kind of tea, but also a very high concentration of catechins and epicatechin galates. So I would say that white tea has more bioactive properties than green tea or black tea, just because of the non-fermented, non-processing, very fresh young leaves from this white tea.
Thank you, Dr. De Mejia. In the interest of time, we're going to move on. We'll try to get, I know this obviously is a very hot topic, and the comments and the questions in the chat part are just keep coming. So this is something we can do some research on, and we'll try to summarize these comments and maybe get some answers to the questions that haven't been answered and post it as a blog on the Nutrition and Wellness page. So thank you, Dr. De Mejia, for this great webinar and offering your time and expertise today. It is evident by the very active chat pod that the participants have learned a great deal and still have a great deal of questions. Nutrition and Wellness is active on social media and has many ways you can connect with us and continue this conversation via Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. We would like for you to please join us in this conversation so we can continue this discussion on phytochemicals and phytonutrients. Today, we are happy to offer one CPEU for today's webinar. In order to receive your CDR certificate, please click on the Qualtrics link on the slide, and we'll also post it on the Learn page. You will need to complete a brief survey about today's webinar, and afterwards you'll be prompted to input your name and email address, and the CDR certificate will be emailed directly to you. A recording of today's webinar will be archived within 48 hours to our YouTube channel, which you can also access via the Learn page. Please let your colleagues know about our archived webinars and our webinars, and they can also, if they're registered dietitians, earn CPEUs. The Nutrition and Wellness is very happy to announce our upcoming webinar, Evidence-Based Guidelines for Nutritional Management of Adult Oncology Patients. This is Thursday, May 4th, 2017, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. And you can register for this at the Learn Extension page link on this page. In addition, we would like to invite our MFLN service provider partners such as DoD, branch services, Guard, and reserve service providers and cooperative extension professionals to continue the discussion in our private and moderated LinkedIn group. Please click the link or join the group or send us an email. We do look forward to hearing from you. I will now turn the presentation over to Coral. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin, and thank you again, Dr. De Mejia, for sharing your expertise today. I would also like to thank all of our participants for sharing your questions and your thoughts. Had a wonderful discussion today. As Robin mentioned, we will be compiling, her team will be compiling some of the popular questions and answers that were discussed during today's webinar. And that recap will be posted to the militaryfamilies.eextension.org link. That's about midway up the chat pod. So they've got a lot of other wonderful blog posts there if you would like to explore those as well. To wrap up, finally, we do invite you to explore all of our upcoming and recording our webinars that cover a whole host of military-connected topics from personal finance to nutrition and wellness and everything in between. So we'll go ahead and back it up to the evaluation certificate of completion link. If you have any questions, you can reach Robin and her team at an email address that will be posted in the chat pod here in just a second, or you can simply email us at milfamln@gmail.com. So thanks again for tuning in today. We'll stay on for another couple of minutes in case you need to collect any links or email addresses from the chat pod. Great. So Robin has posted her email address in the chat pod if you need to ask her any questions and follow up for today's session. So thanks again for tuning in. Thank you again, Dr. De Mejia, and we hope to see you again soon.
My pleasure. Thank you.